The Mafia boss wasn't supposed to be home. He had just stepped into his bedroom when a hand shot out of the darkness. Cold fingers pressed hard over his mouth. "Don't make a sound." It was the maid. She yanked him backward into the walk-in closet, slammed the door shut, and pinned him there, her palm still covering his lips. His heart didn't race. His instincts didn't panic, but her hands were shaking. Through the thin crack of the closet door, he saw the bedroom lights flick on. Footsteps. Not hers, not his wife's. Someone else was inside his house. The maid leaned in so close he could feel her breath. "They think you're still out of town," she whispered. "If they hear you, you won't make it out of this room." A drawer slid open. Metal clicked softly. The Mafia boss finally understood. The most dangerous moment of his life wasn't on the streets. It was standing inches away, inside his own home. Stay with me until the end, because what was about to happen in that closet would expose a betrayal no one saw coming. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Vincent Torino ruled the city with a reputation forged in blood and silence. For 30 years, he'd built an empire where respect was currency and loyalty was life insurance. His enemies knew better than to step onto his territory. His allies knew the price of crossing him. But standing in that closet, pressed against expensive suits that smelled like power and danger, Vincent realized something terrifying. The most secure place in his world had become the most vulnerable. The maid, Elena, kept her hand firm over his mouth, her dark eyes locked on his with an intensity that cut through the darkness. She wasn't just some hired help who cleaned his marble floors and polished his crystal. She was the woman who'd been invisible in his house for 3 years, moving through rooms like a ghost, listening to conversations that could topple governments, watching meetings that decided who lived and who disappeared. Through the crack in the closet door, Vincent watched shadows move across his bedroom wall, multiple figures. They moved with purpose, searching through his personal belongings with the confidence of people who believed they had all the time in the world. One shadow paused near his nightstand. Another moved toward his private safe, hidden behind the oil painting of his grandfather. Elena's grip tightened. Her whisper was barely a breath. 3 men, armed. "They've been here for 20 minutes, waiting for you to come home." Vincent's mind raced through possibilities. His security team should have detected any breach. His surveillance system covered every angle of the property. The fact that these intruders had bypassed everything meant one thing. Someone on the inside had given them the keys to his kingdom. The bedroom door opened wider. Footsteps approached the closet. Elena pressed Vincent deeper into the shadows, her body shielding him as expensive fabric rustled around them. A voice cut through the silence, cold and familiar. "Check every room again. He should have been here by now." Vincent's blood turned to ice. That voice belonged to his nephew, Marcus, the boy he'd raised after his brother's death, the young man he'd groomed to inherit pieces of his empire, the family member he'd trusted with his life. Elena's eyes reflected the same shock Vincent felt. She'd recognized the voice too, but her expression shifted from surprise to something else, knowledge, as if this betrayal wasn't news to her. Another voice joined Marcus in the bedroom. Maybe he changed his plans. The old man's getting paranoid in his age. "No," Marcus replied, his tone sharp with authority Vincent had taught him. "He's coming. Tony confirmed he left the warehouse an hour ago." Vincent never deviates from his routine. Through the crack, Vincent saw Marcus's silhouette move to the window, pulling back the heavy curtains to peer into the night. The same window where Vincent had stood countless times, surveying his domain, believing it was impenetrable. Elena shifted slightly, and Vincent noticed something that made his pulse quicken. She was armed, a small pistol pressed against her hip, concealed beneath her simple black dress. The maid who'd served him coffee every morning for 3 years was carrying a weapon in his own home. "The safe's clean," called the third voice from across the room. "Nothing but cash and some jewelry." Marcus laughed, a sound that held no warmth. "He keeps the real secrets somewhere else. We need him alive long enough to tell us where." Vincent's hands clenched into fists. The empire he'd built, the legacy he'd protected, was being dissected by his own blood. But the deeper horror was realizing how long this had been planned. How many conversations had Marcus overheard? How many family dinners had been reconnaissance missions? Elena pressed her lips close to his ear. "There's something else you need to know," she whispered, her voice carrying weight that made Vincent's chest tighten. "This isn't just about money or territory." Before she could continue, a phone buzzed in the bedroom. Marcus answered immediately. "Yeah, we're in position. Still waiting for him to show." A pause. "No, we haven't found it yet, but we will." Another pause. Longer this time. "Tell her everything's going according to plan." Her. Vincent's mind immediately went to his wife, Isabella. She was supposed to be at her sister's house for the week. A convenient absence that now seemed calculated rather than coincidental. Had his own wife orchestrated this betrayal alongside his nephew? The phone call ended, and Marcus's footsteps moved toward the closet. Elena's grip on Vincent tightened, her breathing shallow but controlled. The closet door had a lock, but it wouldn't hold against determined men with crowbars. "Check the closet," Marcus ordered. Elena's hand moved to her weapon. Vincent realized she was prepared to kill to protect him. But why? What loyalty did a maid owe to a man who'd barely acknowledged her existence for 3 years? The footsteps stopped just outside the closet door. Vincent could see the shadow of shoes beneath the gap. A hand touched the door handle, testing it. Then Elena did something that changed everything. She pulled out her phone and sent a text message. The screen's glow illuminated her face for just a second, but Vincent saw something in her expression that rewrote his understanding of the past 3 years. Elena wasn't just a maid. She was someone else entirely. The closet door handle turned slowly, metal against metal, a whisper of sound that might as well have been thunder in the silence. Vincent prepared himself for violence, for the confrontation that would determine whether he lived to see another sunrise. But Elena pressed her hand against his chest, holding him back. She had a plan. And somehow, Vincent realized he was about to discover that the woman who'd been invisible in his house had been the most important person in it all along. The handle stopped turning. A voice called from the hallway, urgent and sharp. "Marcus, we've got a problem. There's movement in the east wing." The footsteps retreated from the closet door. Elena's shoulders dropped slightly, but her grip on Vincent remained firm. Through the crack, they watched the bedroom empty as the 3 men rushed toward whatever distraction had pulled them away. Elena finally released her hand from Vincent's mouth. His first instinct was to demand answers, but she silenced him with a look that carried years of secrets. "That was my partner," she whispered, checking her phone. "We have maybe 5 minutes before they realize it was a diversion." Vincent stared at her, pieces of a puzzle he'd never known existed suddenly snapping together. The woman who'd dusted his bookshelves, who'd served him breakfast without meeting his eyes, who'd been present for countless private conversations, wasn't who she claimed to be. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," Elena breathed, pulling a badge from beneath her dress. "Agent Elena Vasquez. I've been undercover in your organization for 3 years." The revelation hit Vincent like a physical blow. Every morning coffee, every cleaned room, every moment of invisible service had been surveillance. His own home had been compromised not by enemies, but by law enforcement that had played the longest game imaginable. "Then why are you protecting me?" Vincent's voice was barely audible, confusion mixing with a rage that burned cold. Elena's expression shifted, and for the first time since he'd known her, vulnerability cracked through her professional mask. "Because 30 minutes ago, I intercepted communications that changed everything. This isn't a law enforcement operation anymore." She pulled up a recording on her phone, the volume barely above a whisper. Marcus's voice filled the small space between them. but he wasn't talking to law enforcement. He was coordinating with people Elena recognized from organized crime families that had been at war with Vincent for decades. "Your nephew isn't working alone," Elena continued, her words cutting through Vincent's disbelief. "He's been feeding information to your enemies for months. Tonight isn't about arrests or justice. It's about elimination." Vincent's mind reeled. The federal agent who'd been gathering evidence to destroy him was now the only person standing between him and execution. The irony would have been amusing if it wasn't so terrifying. "The plan was to take you alive," Elena explained, checking the door again. "Extract the locations of your offshore accounts, your weapons caches, the names of your international contacts, then make you disappear permanently." Through the closet wall, they heard furniture being overturned in the next room. The search was becoming more desperate, more destructive. Vincent realized his house was being systematically dismantled by people who knew exactly what they were looking for. "My wife," Vincent said, the words tasting bitter. "Isabella. Is she part of this?" Elena's silence was answer enough. The woman he'd shared his bed with for 15 years, who'd borne his children, who'd stood beside him through wars and victories, had sold him to his enemies. The betrayal cut deeper than any bullet could. "There's more," Elena said, her voice carrying a weight that made Vincent's chest tighten. "The children. Marcus has plans for them too." Vincent's blood turned arctic. His daughter Sophia was at college, supposedly safe in her dormitory. His son Anthony was traveling in Europe. A graduation gift that now seemed like a convenient way to get him out of the country. But if Marcus was willing to eliminate Vincent, family loyalty meant nothing. "They're not safe," Elena continued, reading his expression. "Marcus sees them as threats to his claim on the empire. Loose ends that need cutting." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hallway again. This time, they were moving with purpose toward the bedroom. The diversion had run its course. Elena checked her weapon, her movements precise and practiced. "I can get you out of here," she said, "but you have to trust me." Vincent looked at the woman who'd been his enemy and was now his only ally. 3 years of deception had led to this moment, where their survival depended on each other. The federal agent and the crime boss, united against a betrayal that threatened to destroy them both. "Why should I trust you?" Vincent asked, though he already knew the answer. In a world where his family had turned against him, where his home had become a trap, Elena was the only person who'd warned him instead of exploiting his vulnerability. "Because I've seen what Marcus is capable of," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "And because getting you out alive is the only way I survive this too." The bedroom door opened again. This time, the footsteps moved with deadly certainty toward the closet. Vincent could hear Marcus's voice, closer now, giving orders that sounded like a death sentence. Elena positioned herself between Vincent and the door, her weapon ready. But instead of preparing for a firefight, she reached for something else hidden in her dress. A small device that looked like a garage door opener. "When I press this," she whispered, "every light in the house goes out. We'll have 60 seconds of darkness to reach the service elevator. After that, we're on our own." Vincent nodded, understanding that his survival now depended on a woman who'd spent 3 years learning his every habit, every weakness, every secret. The hunter had become the protector, and the hunted had become her only chance at staying alive. The closet door handle began to turn again. This time, there would be no diversion to save them. Elena's finger hovered over the button that would plunge them into darkness and chaos. "Ready?" she asked. Vincent looked into the eyes of the federal agent who'd been invisible in his world for 3 years, and realized she might be the most dangerous person he'd ever encountered. Not because she was his enemy, but because she'd chosen to become his ally. "Do it," he said. Elena pressed the button, and Vincent's world went black. Darkness swallowed the mansion like a predator claiming its prey. Emergency lighting flickered on after 3 seconds, casting eerie red shadows that turned familiar hallways into a maze of blood-colored nightmares. Elena grabbed Vincent's wrist and pulled him from the closet, just as confused shouts erupted from the bedroom behind them. "This way!" she hissed, her voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. "Stay low and follow my exact steps." Vincent found himself trusting a woman he'd never truly seen, following her through corridors he'd walked for decades that now felt foreign and treacherous. The service elevator she'd mentioned was hidden behind a panel in the kitchen wall, a feature of his own house he'd forgotten existed. Elena's fingers flew over a keypad he didn't know was there. The panel slid open, revealing a cramped elevator shaft barely wide enough for two people. As they squeezed inside, Vincent heard Marcus's voice bellowing through the mansion, no longer bothering with stealth. "Find them. Search every room, every closet, every goddamn corner." The elevator descended into what Vincent realized was a sub-basement he'd never known existed. When the doors opened, Elena led him through a tunnel that stretched beyond the foundation of his home. Emergency lights lined the walls at intervals, creating pools of amber illumination in the underground darkness. "How long have you known about this?" Vincent asked, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "I helped design it," Elena replied, without slowing her pace. 3 years ago, when the renovations were being done on your east wing, the construction crew thought they were installing a wine cellar. They had no idea they were building an escape route." Vincent's mind raced through memories of that renovation project. Isabella had insisted on the upgrades, claiming they needed more entertaining space. Now he understood it had been preparation for tonight. A trap 3 years in the making. The tunnel ended at a heavy steel door. Elena produced a key that looked military-grade, and the door opened to reveal a parking garage Vincent had never seen. A black sedan waited in the shadows, engine running, exhaust visible in the cold underground air. "Your partner?" Vincent asked, nodding toward the car. "Agent Rodriguez," Elena confirmed. "He's been monitoring Marcus's communications since this operation began. We knew something was wrong when your nephew started making calls to numbers that didn't match any of his known associates." As they approached the vehicle, Vincent saw a man in his 40s behind the wheel, his eyes constantly scanning mirrors and shadows. When Elena opened the passenger door, Rodriguez handed her a tablet without speaking. "The communications we intercepted," Elena said, showing Vincent the screen. "Marcus isn't just working with your enemies. He's been selling information to 5 different crime families, playing them against each other while positioning himself as the survivor." Vincent studied the transcripts, recognizing names and numbers that made his blood run cold. Marcus had been conducting his own private war, using Vincent's empire as both weapon and target. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking in its complexity. "Your daughter, Sophia," Rodriguez spoke for the first time, his voice carrying urgency. "She's not at college. Marcus moved her to a safe house in Connecticut 3 days ago, told her it was for her protection." The words hit Vincent like physical blows. His daughter, his brilliant girl who'd inherited his strategic mind but chosen business school over the family empire, was already a prisoner. The realization that Marcus had been planning this for months, maybe years, made Vincent's hands shake with rage. "And Anthony?" Vincent's voice was barely controlled. "Still in Europe, but not by choice," Elena replied, scrolling through more intercepted messages. "Marcus has people watching him. The moment you're confirmed dead, your son becomes a liability too." Rodriguez pulled the car out of the garage through an exit that emerged 3 blocks from Vincent's mansion. As they drove through streets Vincent had controlled for decades, he saw them with new eyes. Every corner could hide an enemy. Every familiar face might be a betrayer. "There's something else," Elena said, her voice carrying a weight that made Vincent's chest tighten. "Isabella isn't just complicit. She's the architect." She handed him another tablet, this one showing financial records that painted a picture of systematic theft spanning 5 years. His wife had been moving money, assets, and information with the precision of someone who understood his empire better than he'd realized. "She's been building her own organization," Elena explained, "using your connections, your reputation, your resources. Marcus thinks he's inheriting your empire, but Isabella's been creating a parallel structure designed to replace you entirely. Vincent stared at bank statements showing millions of dollars transferred to accounts he'd never authorized. Real estate purchases in names he didn't recognize. Investment portfolios that mirrored his own but belonged to shell companies controlled by his wife. "How long have you known?" he asked Elena, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "We suspected for 6 months," she admitted, "but we couldn't prove it until tonight. Marcus got sloppy, started communicating through channels we could monitor. That's when we realized this wasn't just about money or territory." Rodriguez turned onto a highway that led away from the city, away from everything Vincent had built and protected. In the distance, sirens wailed, and Vincent wondered if they were racing toward his mansion or away from something else entirely. "It's about legitimacy," Elena continued. "Isabella wants to inherit your empire, but she also wants to clean it, turn it into something respectable. Your death wasn't just about removing an obstacle. It was about creating a widow with a tragic story and a legitimate claim to everything you own." The tablet showed more evidence. Legal documents prepared months ago, insurance policies with carefully crafted clauses, business partnerships that would activate upon Vincent's death. Isabella had been preparing to become the grieving widow who transformed her husband's criminal empire into a legitimate business dynasty. "She's already been meeting with federal prosecutors," Rodriguez added, his eyes meeting Vincent's in the rearview mirror, "offering cooperation in exchange for immunity. Your death would have made her the star witness in the biggest organized crime case in decades." Vincent felt something break inside his chest, not his heart, that had been hardened by decades of violence and betrayal, something deeper. The foundation of everything he'd believed about loyalty, family, and the bonds that were supposed to be unbreakable. "My children," he said, the words coming out like a prayer. "They don't know, do they?" Elena's silence stretched too long before she answered. "Sophia suspects something. She's been asking questions about family finances, about why certain people have been around more often. Anthony is harder to read from a distance, but his communications suggest he's noticed changes in family dynamics." The car passed a sign indicating they were leaving the state. Vincent realized he was becoming a refugee from his own life, dependent on federal agents who'd been his enemies, until circumstances forced them into an alliance that defied every rule he'd lived by. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Safe house," Rodriguez replied. "Federal facility about 2 hours north. We can protect you there while we figure out how to dismantle this conspiracy without getting you killed in the process." Vincent almost laughed at the irony. He was fleeing to federal protection from his own family. The man who'd built an empire on the principle that law enforcement was the enemy was now trusting his life to agents who'd spent years trying to destroy him. "There's something I need you to understand," Elena said, turning in her seat to face him directly. "Once we reach that safe house, everything changes. You'll be in federal custody, protective custody, but custody nonetheless. Every conversation will be recorded. Every decision you make will be scrutinized." Vincent met her gaze, seeing the woman who'd been invisible in his world for 3 years, but had somehow become the most important person in it. "Are you asking if I'm prepared to cooperate with federal law enforcement?" "I'm asking if you're prepared to survive," Elena replied, "because cooperation might be the only weapon you have left against people who know all your other weapons." The highway stretched ahead into darkness, leading Vincent away from everything he'd built and toward a future he couldn't have imagined hours earlier. Behind them, his mansion was probably crawling with Marcus's men, searching for a body that would never be found. His empire was being carved up by people who'd smiled at his dinner table, but he was alive, and as long as he was breathing, the war wasn't over. "Tell me about the safe house," Vincent said, his voice carrying the steel that had made him feared for 3 decades. "And tell me everything you know about Isabella's organization. Because if my wife thinks she can bury me and inherit my life, she's about to learn that Vincent Torino doesn't die easily." Elena smiled for the first time since he'd known her, and Vincent realized she'd been waiting for this moment. The moment when the crime boss stopped running and started planning his counterattack. Now you're talking like the man who built an empire, she said. Let's go tear down the one they're trying to steal. The car disappeared into the night, carrying three unlikely allies toward a confrontation that would determine whether Vincent's legacy would be written by his enemies or reclaimed by his own hand. The safe house looked like any other suburban home from the outside. 2 stories, beige siding, a lawn that needed cutting. But the moment Rodriguez pulled into the driveway, Vincent noticed the details that marked it as something else entirely. Security cameras disguised as decorative fixtures, windows that reflected light in a way that suggested bulletproof glass, a mailbox positioned to provide clear sightlines down the street in both directions. Elena led him through a front door that opened before they reached it. The agent waiting inside was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. She introduced herself as Agent Sarah Chen, the supervisor running Vincent's protective detail. "Mr. Torino," she said, her voice carrying professional courtesy edged with steel. "Welcome to your new reality." The interior confirmed what Vincent had suspected. This wasn't a house. It was a fortress disguised as suburban normalcy. Reinforced walls, multiple exit routes, communication equipment that belonged in a military command center. The living room had been converted into a briefing area, complete with monitors displaying surveillance feeds and data streams. "Before we go any further," Chen said, settling into a chair across from Vincent, "I need to make something clear. You're here voluntarily, but that doesn't mean you're free to leave. The moment you walked through that door, you became a federal witness under protective custody." Vincent studied her face, recognizing the kind of authority that came from years of making life and death decisions. "And if I decide I don't want to be a witness, then you walk out that door and probably don't live to see sunrise," Chen replied without blinking. "Marcus has put a $2 million bounty on your head. Every street criminal, every desperate junkie, every ambitious punk with a gun is looking for you right now." Elena moved to one of the monitors, pulling up a feed that showed Vincent's mansion. Police cars surrounded the property, their red and blue lights painting the walls in chaos. Crime scene tape fluttered in the wind like funeral decorations. "They found 3 bodies," Elena reported, her voice flat with professional detachment. "Marcus staged it to look like a home invasion gone wrong. The official story is that you surprised burglars and were killed in the struggle." Vincent watched his own death being investigated on the screen. Paramedics wheeled out body bags while news vans gathered like vultures. The sight should have been surreal, but instead it felt like watching the final act of a play he'd never understood he was starring in. "Isabella's performance is particularly convincing," Rodriguez added, switching to another feed. "She arrived an hour ago, perfectly distraught. The grieving widow who lost her husband to random violence." Vincent saw his wife on the screen, surrounded by reporters and sympathetic neighbors. Her tears looked genuine, her anguish authentic. She was wearing the black dress he'd bought her for their anniversary last year, the one she'd said made her feel beautiful. Now it was a costume for his funeral. "She's good," Chen observed, watching Isabella field questions with just the right mix of grief and composure. "Almost too good. If we didn't have the intercepted communications, I'd believe her myself." Elena pulled up another screen showing financial transactions from the past 6 hours. Even as Isabella mourned her husband's death on television, money was moving through accounts linked to her shadow organization. The grieving widow was already liquidating assets, consolidating power, preparing to inherit an empire. "Marcus is staying out of sight for now," Elena explained. "But our surveillance shows he's been meeting with representatives from 4 different crime families since the staged murder. He's positioning himself as the legitimate heir to your organization." Vincent felt rage building in his chest, like a slow burn. His nephew was auctioning off pieces of his empire before his body was cold. The boy he'd taught to drive, who'd called him Uncle Vince and begged for bedtime stories, was carving up his life's work like a Christmas turkey. "What about my children?" Vincent's voice carried an edge that made everyone in the room pay attention. "Sophia and Anthony, Are they safe? Chen's expression softened slightly. Sophia is still being held at the Connecticut safe house, but she doesn't know she's a prisoner. Marcus has convinced her that she's being protected from the people who killed her father. She's grieving, but she's alive. And Anthony? More complicated, Rodriguez admitted. He's in Prague, staying at a hotel that's being watched by Marcus's people. He thinks he's just extending his European vacation while the family deals with the tragedy. He has no idea he's being kept on ice until Marcus decides what to do with him. Vincent closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his children's danger pressing against his chest. Everything he'd built, every sacrifice he'd made, had been designed to protect his family. Now his family was destroying itself from the inside. There's something else, Elena said, her voice carrying hesitation. Something we discovered in the communications that changes everything. She pulled up a new screen showing encrypted messages between Isabella and someone identified only as the architect. The content made Vincent's blood run cold. Your wife isn't just stealing your empire, Elena explained. She's been feeding information to law enforcement for 2 years. Not to us, to another agency entirely. One that's been building a case against you that goes far beyond anything we had. Vincent stared at the messages, each one a betrayal that cut deeper than the last. Isabella had been documenting his operations, recording his conversations, photographing his private documents. She'd turned their marriage into an intelligence-gathering operation. The Department of Justice has been building a RICO case using Isabella's information, Chen continued. They were planning to arrest you next month. Your convenient death just saved them the trouble of a trial. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Isabella hadn't just planned to inherit his empire. She'd planned to legitimize it by cooperating with federal prosecution. She would be the reformed widow who'd helped bring down organized crime, the perfect candidate for political office or corporate leadership. She's been promised immunity, Rodriguez added, full protection in exchange for her testimony. The Justice Department sees her as their key to dismantling not just your organization, but the entire Northeast crime syndicate. Vincent felt something die inside him. Not hope that had been murdered hours ago, something deeper. The last fragment of belief that some bonds were sacred, that some betrayals were unthinkable. How long do we have? He asked, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. Before what? Chen replied. Before Isabella realizes I'm alive. Before Marcus figures out where I am. Before every law enforcement agency in the country starts hunting me as a fugitive from my own death. Elena exchanged glances with Chen before answering. Maybe 48 hours. Maybe less. The staged crime scene will only hold up under so much scrutiny. And Isabella knows you better than anyone. If she starts questioning the evidence, if she realizes the bodies aren't right, she'll know I survived, Vincent finished. And if she knows, Marcus knows. And if Marcus knows, I'm dead for real this time. Vincent stared at the monitors showing his own funeral preparations, knowing he had less than 2 days to reclaim his life from the people who'd stolen it. The federal agent who'd saved him, the wife who'd betrayed him, the nephew who'd sold him. All players in a game where the stakes were survival itself. Sometimes the person closest to you isn't protecting you from danger, they're the danger. And sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. What would you do if you discovered your entire family had been plotting your death?